Well, food agriculture is very important to this country. It's important to each and every one of us, but it's a hot topic as the US complains about food practices or food production in this country, from questions about supply management. Everything is on the table today when we talk about food and agriculture in this country. Well, food and agriculture in Canada is a big business. In 2024, from farmers to food processors, it's a 2.3 million people are involved in this industry, and it involves one of every nine jobs in this country. It's big business, some $150 billion or 7% of our GDP, according to Stats Canada. But it's a hot topic as we talk about food and agriculture. So, with me here today to help us understand this complex system and the challenges it faces and the opportunities is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, and he's a faculty member at Dalhousie University, but also is a visiting faculty member at McGill, and he's an all around great guy. So, welcome, Sylvain.
Well, hello, David.
Well, Sylvan, I'm so glad that you could join us today because you're also the host of a brilliant podcast called The Professor, pardon me. And I just want to commend you for that kind of work. Like ourselves, we seek to educate and elevate the level of thinking and insight and analysis about our food and agricultural system. Why did you decide to undertake that podcast, Sylvan?
Well, I mean, as a public intellectual, I mean, I can always publish and teach and do the things we do as academics, but I've been engaged with think tanks like yours. I believe the first time I interacted with Frontier was over 20 years ago, so it's been
Isn't
a
that
while.
amazing?
And the reason why I really enjoyed working with uh, Frontier or with other think tanks is because, well, you're trying to move the needle on policy, basically,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And the podcast to me was another instrument I was able to use or I can use to influence policy. And after 5 years, so we just finished our fifth season now, and it's actually the top Canadian produced podcast in Canada under management. So I'm really pleased about that. And our budget is near zero. We do have some partners, but we don't really require a whole lot of resources. And every time I go on the road, that's when I realize a lot of people are listening to the podcast, and they're
Indeed.
always intrigued about some of our comments. And of course, we have special guests joining us all the time. Most of them are C-suite folks. So essentially, you kind of have to really focus on quality and making sure that people are listened to. And the other thing, David, is that I've always believed that in Canadian society, I don't think we give a whole lot of attention to the agri-food sector. Either that, or we don't
Mhm.
understand it. And so our
Yeah.
job, Michael and I, Michael LeBlanc, my producer, is to really get people to think differently about the agri-food sector.
Well, it's I want to commend you for that, Sylvain. It is um, it is a complex system, food and agriculture today in this country, but it's a hot topic. So we're going to dare to try to understand this system with your kind help. And so the first slide I want to bring up here is a little bit about looking at Canada at a glance here in terms of where egg is at in terms of top commodities. And here's an example here. But basically, you've got a picture of food production from coast to coast here. And as you can see, Canada has got an incredible diversity of what's being produced here. Any comments on what Canada looks like here in terms of food production?
Well, I think each region is capitalizing on their core competencies. I mean, there are certain commodities that are more easier to produce than others, and also it's reflective of the culture as well. I have the pleasure to speak in many different parts, many parts of the country, and every time I go on stage and talk to different groups, you can sense that there's a different culture. They see the agri-food sector very differently. For
Mm,
example, in Quebec, where supply management is really, really important, that policy is actually key for them. They do process 60% of their commodities in the province, which is something that we don't see elsewhere. So there's a certain culture there, whereas say in Alberta, it's all about global trades. It's all about
mhm,
the international market. So they're equally as concerned about what's going on in Europe or Asia as they are in Canada. So it's just so different. And of course,
mhm.
where I am in the Atlantic, you have Canada's Food Island, PI, which only has 130,000 people, but a lot is being done on PI. Not a whole lot of people actually hear about it, but PI is really grows a lot of different commodities for themselves and for other provinces as well. If you go to Toronto and some of the key restaurants, the best restaurants in Toronto will serve PI beef and nobody knows about it.
No kidding. So every region kind of has its focus or strengths that they're building on in terms of what they have to offer. And what I find interesting as well, that affects, and well, I guess we'll get to that in a moment, is that affects the politics of our food system as every region kind of lobbies for their industry. Is that right?
Yes, and some are more successful than others. I'm sure you know that, David.
Yes.
You know,
Well, I think you referenced the supply management system, or in particular the dairy industry in Quebec, is a
yeah,
very powerful lobby. Is that right?
it is unfairly, and of course, I think it's been unfair to other commodities because I do think that we do give too much attention to the SM5 compared to other commodities, and other commodities do need some support, and you can feel that within the camaraderie of commodities, there are tensions, palpable
Hmm.
tensions, much more so now than ever before, I would say, because of what's happening with the United States right now under Trump 2.0. Of course, with tensions with India, China as well. So you can feel that right now. I think 10, 15, 20 years ago, farmers farmers wanted to support other farmers no matter what you were growing. That
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
kind of the implicit rule, but that rule is slowly fading away just because stakes are so high now,
Wow.
and frankly, I can feel that some groups, especially those under supply management, actually I've received way more attention compared to other sectors like canola,
Hmm.
wheat, and beef, and
Hmm.
pork as well.
Well, it certainly is a hot topic today. So help us understand this a system. It's often been described as a kind of an integrated chain, and help us understand the difference between, well, the producers and the people that process the food.
Yeah, so you're talking about supply management or just generally speaking?
I'm talking generally speaking at first.
Yeah, so I mean, farmers are price takers. They don't control anything really, and obviously, that really has an impact on policy, but also has an impact on the culture of that particular vector or sector that you're looking at. So, and I'm
Hmm.
thinking of, say, cattle, for example. There are only a handful of federally licensed um, packers in Canada for cattle. Two of them are in Alberta. There's one in Ontario, and so there's this high consolidation, and that grants that sector, cattle or beef packing, a whole lot of power, to be honest.
Hmm.
And over the years, you've seen cattle being impacted by that for sure. With the hog industry, of course, there's some high variations between provinces. So, for example, Quebec really supports its hog industry quite a lot. Just in case of losses, the insurance programs there revenue stabilization programs there are incredibly generous, and that tends to distort the market a little bit.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
grains is much more open market, of course. It's up and down, and now we're on the downside, which is unfortunate. But the last couple of years, it's been up. So it really depends on where you're at. But generally speaking, with with price taking, a lot of things can happen, and that tends to become quite frustrating for farmers. Processing to me is the forgotten child in Canada. We don't do well in processing. We've allowed a lot of multinationals to come into the Canadian market to invest in processing, which actually makes the entire sector much more vulnerable. And in distribution and retail, of course, we all know the story around consolidation. There are just a few Canadian grocers out there,
Hmm.
Empire, Sobeys, Loblaws, and Metro, and they basically dictate a lot of the rules. They dictate our diets, really, to a certain extent. Now, of
Hmm.
course, you have Walmart and Costco, two American players that are playing a much larger role now, but largely to commercialize, to penetrate the market in Canada has been extremely difficult, which is why the Canadian government has supported the concept of the grocer code of conduct, for example, to democratize the supply chain, allowing farmers, processors to have a better shot at selling whatever you want to sell to Canadians
Hmm.
directly.
So would you say that from a like a principled policy point of view, I mean, at Frontier, we don't like monopolies. We like healthy competition, so to speak,
Yeah,
both at the producer level, but also at the food processing level. So is
yeah.
that kind of a seminal principle that you look through this whole system and say, hey, if there isn't good competition, it's not really serving ultimately the consumer, our choices, our ability to even afford the stuff that we put on our table.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the frontier is ahead of Canadians in terms of its relationship with, or understanding with monopolies. I've always said that Canadians actually love monopolies until they don't. I
Ah,
mean, because
what do you mean by that? Until they realize that it doesn't serve them?
they feel some sense of protection and security with monopolies, but once things get expensive, they second guess themselves. You know,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
and, and competition is an important concept, and I don't believe that Canadians actually understand the power of competition at all. To be
Hmm.
honest, we
Hmm.
have over 120 marketing boards in Canada.
A
So
hundred
we
and
have
twenty.
yes, yes. We
And what do
often
they
talk
all
about
do? What do they all
they
do,
com-
Sylvan?
they commercialize commodities for farmers. So the single
So
desk
let's
model,
just
the
back up for a
monopsony.
sec. Just explain this in plain language. What is a marketing board? Like this is what
Yeah,
kind
there's
of,
all
like
sorts.
it's a
I
little,
mean, all marketing boards are different, but marketing boards are set up to countervail power up the food chain. So they'll represent price takers, farmers, and they'll sell. It will be a single desk model, just like the Canadian Wheat Board, which was dismantled in 2012. And I do remember
sorry, what do
presenting
you mean
at
by
the.
a single, what do you mean by a single desk? Um,
You're
what do you
forced
mean by a
by
single desk?
farmer to sell to one customer. So in the case of the wheat board, of course, you had one customer. It was a Canadian wheat board based out of Winnipeg. If you didn't
Hmm.
sell your wheat and barley through that single desk, you went to jail. That's
Oh,
basically how
wow. So
things
the
worked.
government had a law and said you got to sell through this organization,
Yep.
otherwise you're going to jail.
So that's a marketing board, but there are different rules for every different marketing board. Some are much more strict than others. Now, the SM5 supply management, that's probably the most strict regime that we have in Canada by far. I mean, because you have a quota
Mhm.
system, you only produce what you're told to produce, basically, and you have to go through one customer, and so that's
So a
pretty
quota
rigid.
is like a so Sylvan, the quota is like a license. So you have to buy a license to produce, and you're told how much you can produce. And if you produce too much, that's when you have to dump your milk or whatever you have.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's
Like
right.
literally,
Well,
you have to dump it.
that's why they call it supply management. As a country with government sanctioned quotas, you produce what you need basically. And so the
Wow.
whole idea is to create that fake equilibrium because there's no such thing as an
Hmm.
equilibrium between supply and demand, which is why sometimes we'll see some milk dumping going on and things like that. But at the end of the day, supply management is very strict regime. But you have other marketing boards
Okay.
in horticulture, for example, in different provinces where you'll sell potatoes or you'll sell carrots, and so there are, and but you're not asking farmers to produce a certain amount. It's just
Hmm.
they'll actually sell your products for you, for example. But the fascination around monopolies in Canada is extremely unhealthy because, like I said, Canadians love monopolies because it brings a sense of certainty and security until they don't, because all of a sudden they realize that without competition, or when you're suppressing competition, you tend to push prices higher. And
Hmm.
so you always need more competition for anything really. And so
Okay.
it's funny that when we've been hearing about some of the things over the last few years with higher inflation, we need more competition now more than ever. Well,
Hmm.
we always need more competition no matter what.
All right.
If the fact that we don't get more competition is an indication that our market is not attractive enough for new investors, and that's the trick here.
So in other words, as we've had more inflation, there's more scrutiny then on prices and more scrutiny on the food system. And people are starting to wonder, hey, is this in some parts of our agricultural system, there's a lot of monopolies. And is that really serving us? And
Exactly.
I mean, the big question I guess you mentioned is it even, are we a market that's healthy enough to even attract investment from other places like the United States or Europe?
Exactly. So when we were working with Minister Champagne a few years ago, when he was Minister of Innovation, he called us and basically asked us, how do we actually keep inflation lower? Well, I basically told him, well, you need to increase competition. And
Yeah.
in his mind, and he did that. He actually picked up the phone and called grocers like Aldi and Lidl to invite them to come to Canada to increase competition. That's not how it works. The government's role is to enable conditions to actually increase competition and increase investment into our
Hmm.
country.
Hmm.
It is quite ironic right now to see uh, nobody come into Canada as new players. The
Hmm.
last player that came to Canada was Target in 2014, and we saw what had happened. Since then, we saw Nordstrom, Sears, Lowe's, Target. All these companies actually came and left Canada. Meanwhile, we have a Canadian grocer, TNT, owned by Loblaw, going into the United States right now. They're opening up a
Hmm.
few grocery stores in the United States, which means the economy there is very interesting. And therefore, while Loblaw, the number one grocery in
Yeah.
Canada, is recognizing some opportunities, the role of
Hmm.
government is to actually make Canada attractive for investments, and that hasn't been the focus clearly in recent years.
Okay, so golly, this sounds like a big fork in the roads where you're fundamentally asking the big questions around food and food processing, in the sense that you're saying the role of government is to get out of the way, quite frankly, and to enable a competitive market that serves the consumer, but also renews it, keeps it competitive.
That's right. So that's why I've always believed that Canadians have an unhealthy understanding of what competition actually means and what
Hmm.
competition is. Yeah, so some Canadians actually believe that we should say regulate retail prices.
Hmm.
A similar mechanism that we saw in France, for example, a few years ago. That is the worst thing you want to do to suppress it to increase competition. You'll actually just you're basically saying to the marketplace, well, if you want to make money, don't invest in food, basically, because this is how much money you can make, and
Hmm.
margins are extremely low in the food business,
Right.
and frankly, margins are unpredictably low. which means you want to make sure that, yes, governments stay out of the way so food businesses can actually make the money they need to keep at it,
Mhm.
invest, innovate, offer better products, high quality products to Canadians, safe products as well.
So if you had to look at the big picture then, Sylvan, it's like we have aspects of our system that are really successful. We enjoy all kinds of food in this country. But the larger strategic picture is that, well, frankly, is our system very successful? Because if you look at the larger world stage, people are not investing here in Canada in this food system. Is that's kind of a huge sign that our system is in trouble, isn't it?
A little. Now, at Farmgate, I actually think that Canada is doing very well at Farmgate with some, like with gene editing and biotechnologies. Actually, that's one sector that, because you have to think about the entire food system, and when you think about
Mhm.
Farmgate and inputs, actually Canada is doing very well.
Great.
It's the rest of the game that really things get a little fuzzy, especially in
What do you
processing.
mean by the farm gate, Sylvan?
So production, the production of commodities, and how we
Okay.
support that ecosystem through research and grain handling and all that.
Mhm.
Now, there's there's a lot going on there that we do very well. The one thing that we don't do well, and it's funny because I just came back from Brazil, and Brazil is an incredible agri-food super powerhouse now.
Mhm.
If you remember 30 years ago, Brazil was a net importer of food.
Yes,
Now
I
it
recall that.
feeds almost a billion people on Earth. It's just an incredible success story. But the one thing that they're having troubles with is with logistics, moving grains, moving products around, and we face the same challenge in Canada to remain competitive. We often face, well, labor disputes,
Mhm.
railways that are not efficient, that requires some upkeeping, ports that are not necessarily efficient. If you look at the ranking of both Montreal and Vancouver, those two ports rank very low in terms of efficiencies in the world. And so I don't think we've given logistics uh, its fair attention over the years. And as a big country, you really want to be more strategic about how you move products around within
Mhm.
your own borders and how you trade with other nations around the world. So as soon as you leave Farmgate, Canada is much less competitive than they should be.
Okay, so the producers are doing pretty well. We seem to have a lot of success in that system, and but when it comes to, well, things like infrastructure, I think of the port systems as an example in this country, and
Yeah,
I've seen these rankings. I mean, it's incredible how low we are ranked internationally. I think we're right at the bottom, Sylvan,
we
if
are.
memory serves. And so, what are the actions the government should be taking to get this country on the move, including our ports? Like, why would we
Well,
not just privatize them?
so just to go back to Farmgate, I mean, I don't think things are perfect either at Farmgate, even though
Okay.
producers are doing their best. Uh, Things are a mess geopolitically, and as you know, we're facing tariffs in India, in China, with the United States as well. So it's not rosy for farmers as well due to geopolitical
Hmm.
entanglements. And
Sure.
I don't think that Canada is a good strong player around geopolitics. We're not good at geopolitics at all. And you can see that with how we're dealing with Donald Trump. We just elected a government in Ottawa, thinking that we just appointed the best prime minister to deal with Donald Trump. That is a
Hmm.
completely misunderstanding of what the situation is all about. You cannot deal with Donald Trump. Nobody can deal with Donald Trump. It's more about tone and coping with the Washington regime right now. And so you can sense that in Canada, we don't really have a full understanding of our
Hmm.
geopolitical positioning compared to, say, Mexico with President Sheinbaum. I mean, she's been pretty clear about her feelings about the Trump regime, and but she needs to deal with the United States. And so I don't think we've been honest with ourselves as a country. Now,
Well,
looking
what do you mean by
forward,
that? So if you were an advisor to the prime minister, what would your advice be?
focusing on just we need to focus on internal efficiencies as much as possible, and cope with whatever Washington will throw at us. I don't
Okay.
think there's any other way to do it. Donald Trump will do what Donald Trump wants to do.
So just hold on for a sec. Are you saying that we need to get our house in order in terms of, well, we don't have internal trade in this country. We were founded in 1867 and we still do not have an open market in this country from province to province. That itself would
Yeah.
be 4 to 5 points in our GDP. We should do that right now, but we're not, are we?
Absolutely. Now, so we do see some heavy lifting being done by provinces, which is great, in
Indeed,
the
yes.
agri-food sector. That's a good sign. But again, um, there is some indication that we're not being honest with ourselves, and supply management is certainly a problem with dairy in particular. Dairy is a brings international interprovincial barriers, and if you notice how bill C5 is structured, it doesn't address the issue of supply management at all. So we're not necessarily eliminating interprovincial trade barriers, which could actually not only save Canadians some money, but it could actually make our marketplace way more competitive, which is why it goes back to my first point about competitiveness. uh, while people are saying, "Oh, this is great. I can actually buy wines from Ontario or this from Nova Scotia or that from Alberta." But what about our own businesses? They may not be able to compete. Well, that's the rule of an open marketplace. Uh, you have to become competitive or you disappear. That's how. And we haven't done the proper work over the years to actually make sure that companies actually remain competitive.
Yeah, so I think you're onto something, Sylvain, is that we have to take a hard look at ourselves and ask, are we a good place to do business? And quite frankly, money is leaving our country in hundreds of billions of dollars, certainly the last 10 years. And that's probably the most simple indicator that business doesn't read us as a place to do business. It's
I'll
seen
give
as
you
a
a
hostile
simple
place.
I'll give you a simple example, David. Let's say that you're a pie maker in Ontario, okay, and you operate a provincially licensed facility, and so you have a very, very small market, but the cost of production is probably very high.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, you allow other pie makers from other provinces to come into your market. What's going to happen? Well, either you have two choices. You either close because you won't be competitive enough, or you decide to reinvest and become more competitive. But here's the
Hmm.
thing: if you become more competitive, then as a company, you all of a sudden have new options. You can actually sell your pies to other provinces and perhaps even internationally,
Why not?
because all of a sudden you become so interesting, you become competitive, you can actually invest, get your federal license, and then export to other markets like Europe, Asia, and other places. I'm using
Hmm.
pie as an example, but that's the philosophy that I don't think we've embraced enough in Canada.
Okay, so we don't have a vision in this country in certain parts of the system in food production to export to the world. Other parts of it, we have that vision. Like I'm thinking of, say, in the grain industry, our vision is to be in the every world market that we can be in. So is that where our food and agricultural system is really a mixed bag?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about risk aversion, and that risk aversion has actually made our food more expensive domestically and less competitive internationally.
Okay, so I mean, we know that the role of government is very significant here to frankly get out of the way. And I guess one of the things I'm fascinated about is when it comes to a myriad of regulations that make it very complex for food and agricultural production in this country, and including in land regulation. And I look at that, and these land regulations, the zoning bylaws, if you will, vary, as you know, from province to province, from municipality to municipality. Can
Yeah.
you explain the impact of land regulation on this industry?
That from one province to another, there are variations for sure, and the one thing that we've taken for granted in Canada is space. We have plenty of space, lots of space, and sometimes interest groups will value or will want to value primary production and local production as much as possible.
Hmm.
They are
Hmm.
they are shifting paradigms and they are conflicting interests as well. Sometimes you have groups saying, well, we need to focus on food sovereignty, we need to produce what we need. And other groups are saying, well, we need to grow our economy. And I think that there's space, there's enough space for both.
Mm.
But policy around land management has actually been influenced and skewed by those two conflicting interests. And the ALR in BC is a good example of that.
Sorry, what's
Uh,
the ALR? Can you explain what that is in BC?
well, the ALR is basically forcing primary production
So
to be in
it means
sync.
the agricultural land reserve in
That's right,
BC.
exact in
Yeah.
BC. It basically creates this synchronization process between production and processing as well. And so, if you are a processor in BC, I believe 50% of your commodities have to be grown within a certain distance of that facility. And
You're
that,
kidding.
yes, and which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense because right now, I mean, most food products will require ingredients from different places around the world. And so it's not necessarily realistic to think that way. But the ALR is fueled by this one paradigm of localized food economies. And looking at Canada being a vast land, and of course, Canada is an open economy. That policy just doesn't make sense, at least not anymore.
Okay,
And
so
so
just stop here for a sec. So we've got Canada, the second largest nation in the world. And in some jurisdictions, the government is trying to force itself and regulate all those measures of where you're going to produce the food and where you're going to process it. I mean, this is bizarre. If you want to drive and create an uncompetitive food system, that would be the way to do it, wouldn't it?
that's right. So, but again, in fairness to policymakers that have decided to make some of these decisions, that was not it was not the priority. The priority was about local systems, and like I said, I don't think we've actually I've thought about food systems strategically in this country at all over the years, and so I think it's high time. And so the Trump regime is basically forcing all of us to think differently about who we are. So supply management, going back to supply management, 20, 30 years ago, the vast majority of Canadians supported supply management without knowing why. But now, all of a sudden, we see something is at stake. 1%
Ah.
of the economy is holding back 99% of it. So is
Now,
it
what do you mean
really
by
worth
that? The
it?
1% is holding us back? What do you mean?
Well, supply management represents about 1% of the economy. But if we but 99% of the economy wants to trade with the rest of the world. So if supply management is used against the entire economy, that becomes a problem. So how
Okay, so
important is supply
just to
management
back up
really?
for a sec. So maybe I could just come back to that in a sec here. Is the tariff discussion. All I know is that when people are showing up at the grocery store, and I just had a conversation again with a fellow grocery shopper last week, is people are horrified by the price of what it costs to buy different products that they used to be able to buy. They look at you know um, well, just about anything, and people are making difficult decisions, and they're
Yeah.
pretty upset about this. And I just see this clear as a bell. The surveys show this as well. So there's been a lot of fancy talk, like the people use um, phrases like food security. Well, what's food security if you can't even afford to buy food?
Yep. No, absolutely. And so people are pushed to make different decisions, ask questions, question the current system, and they see something is not right. And so they're being told by politicians certain things, and when they go to the grocery store, it doesn't really fit the narrative that they're hearing. And
Okay,
and of course, you have social media now today that is allowing people to talk to each other, and which has actually lessened the power and influence of mass of mainstream media. So
ah,
you got a lot of information being thrown at people saying, "Listen, we're getting contradicting information here. So what's actually is going on?"
exactly. So in this context, are there a host of other government policies? Well, let's say carbon taxes. What has been their impact on the price of food? Has that been a good policy?
On the processed food retail, you mean? It's
Retail
not
producers?
well, it's not clear retail, but certainly wholesale. There are issues there for sure, and as you know, uh, Prime Minister Carney paused the consumer part of the carbon tax, but the industrial part is still there. And to me, the biggest problem for the agri-food sector is the industrial carbon tax. Why? Because why it's making the sector less competitive overall.
Hmm.
You're
Hmm.
paying more tax, and of course we're asking farmers, processors in Canada to compete against farmers and processors from outside of Canada, like in the US, for example, where there are no carbon taxes at all. And so I've always been concerned about how the policy is impacting the competitiveness of the sector. Because
Right
with
on.
price, a lot of economists have actually argued, oh well, the carbon tax is not making food more expensive, and we've actually tried it ourselves. We've never been able to correlate the policy with retail prices because retail prices is distorted by so many different factors. It's hard to
Mm.
isolate the one factor, which is the carbon tax, but
Hmm.
wholesale prices there's less noise impacting
Oh,
wholesale
I see.
because you can actually predict prices based on input costs much more easily. Correlations are clearer and stronger, so it's easier
Ah,
to isolate the carbon tax policy onto what's going on wholesale. And we actually did notice a big difference between what's going on in Canada versus the US. And so it's been our number one concern since day one is that Ottawa, when they implemented the carbon tax in 2019, they never bothered to understand how the policy would impact our agri-food sector's competitiveness.
no
Mark
kidding.
Carney decided to retail the issue, which is fine, and people are saving money, but he hasn't really addressed the real issue for our farmers and processors.
Okay, so they implemented this ham-fisted policy, carbon taxes, at the producer level. And they took it away at the consumer level because it was attractive retail politics, as you're alluding to.
Yep.
But in the process, that makes our producers less competitive because you've got every other nation that doesn't have this. So it's really not helpful policy, is it,
That's
Sylvan?
that's right. Again, I'm not necessarily against carbon taxing, but I'm certainly concerned about carbon taxing in food in
Well,
particular.
okay,
And I've
well,
never
it's
understood
making
why, because as you're implementing a carbon tax, you're basically recognizing that producing food is a problem for the environment. Whereas you're basically dealing with the best environmental stewards in the world, farmers. It never made sense to me.
okay. So we all know that monopolies are bad. Are big grocery chains that control our food retail system, are they ripping us off?
I get that question more often than I want to. I just basically ask people, well, look at metrics, look at market metrics, and you'll get your answer. But nobody actually looks at financial statements, and nobody looks at food inflation versus same store food sales. I mean, keep in mind that these companies are highly diversified.
Hmm.
they're not only selling food. I mean, Loblaw, for example, is a bank. Loblaw is a real estate company. Loblaw
Oh,
sells
yes.
pharmaceuticals. It sells cosmetics. Shoppers
Hmm.
Drug Mart, for example.
Right.
Shoppers Drug Mart is Loblaw's bank, really. It generates a lot
Hmm.
of income. So, two
Hmm.
metrics you want to look at: gross margins. So, basically, revenues minus the cost of goods in food. Okay. And
Hmm.
that's been stable for all three majors in Canada over the last 6, 7 years. And two, you look at same store food sales versus food inflation, and that often has been underwater. Okay. So if
Mm,
there's no
wow.
growth in food sales, same store food sales, and food inflation is higher, it means that they're making money elsewhere. So my
Ah,
answer to you is that, well, are grocers profiteering, exaggerating, abusing? It is possible, but not in food.
okay. So that's the kicker there. It's a tough business. The margins in the grocery
Well,
business
the
are
margins
pretty
are
tough.
extremely low now. Let's say, for
So how
example,
low?
you
Like
could.
50%? 50%, Sylvan? Give us an example.
So the gross margin for Sobeys is anywhere between 26 to 28. Sobeys is not Sobeys, but Loblaw is 32, 33. Okay, but Metro is around 35. So the most profitable of all three Canadian grocers is Metro. Now you could argue, why don't
So
we
that's a
see
lot of money. That's huge profits at 35%, isn't it,
gross
Sylvan?
margins? Net margins is
Gross.
like 2 to 4
Oh,
percent. Yeah,
okay.
two to
But
four
that's the
percent.
bottom line is we're
Because
talking about an
because gross
industry that
margins,
gets 2
so
to 4%.
the gross margins are important when it comes to assessing profiteering, because it's basically revenues minus the cost of goods. With net profits, you got taxes in there, you got different costs, so it's a little it's less
Mhm.
clear. And frankly, net profits, a lot of companies can get creative with accounting, if you will. But that's
Mhm.
why if you actually move away from the
Yeah.
noise and look at gross margins, that's the best metric to assess whether or not there's profiteering going on. But I mean, some people may argue, well, why don't we see grocers use like Shoppers Drug Mart in Loblaw's case to subsidize food and keep prices lower,
Oh,
so
okay.
Loblaws can actually sell food at a loss? And so that could be an argument, but I don't
Mhm.
see why Loblaws would want to sell food at a loss to
Mhm.
actually keep people happy. I mean, because right
Mhm.
now, when you look at food prices, generally speaking, and this is something we rarely hear out in the marketplace, but food expenses relative to household income in Canada is incredibly low. It's the sixth
Mhm.
lowest in the world. So we spend about 9.2% of our disposable income on food in Canada, which is
Okay.
incredibly low.
So it's still incredibly low, the amount of money we spend on food in this country. So that's something we should be able to celebrate. But when you're used to really low prices and when they go up, then that creates a lot of scrutiny. I do have a question related to labor, Sylvain. In different parts of our food system, we have a fair amount of imported labor that we rely on to be able to, well, let's say, harvest crops. And it's temporary labor that comes in from the world to Canada to be able to harvest crops. Why is that? Where are the Canadians? Where have they gone? I know that unemployment is rising in this
Yeah.
country. Do Canadians not want to work in these businesses?
Not really. I mean, I used to be one of them. I mean, I used to work on
I was.
farms. But yeah, exactly. And but things have changed. I mean, kids aren't interested in working in difficult environments, whether it's on a farm where it's labor intensive,
Hmm.
physically tough, and of course, in processing, you often work in humid environments, for example,
Hmm.
uh, and frankly, salaries would be higher, and so
Hmm.
uh, it's been an easy exit for companies, but we are seeing some exaggeration. I mean, we're seeing even food service now relying on temporary foreign workers, which is a little ridiculous, to be honest. I think
Okay,
we've
well let's just talk about that, Sylvan, because I go to and by the way, I grew up working on different farms and I just loved it. So I'm just shocked that more Canadians don't want to get on that kind of work and earn some money. It seems strange to me, but I think you're really getting at a cultural problem in this
Yeah, I
country
think so.
around
Well,
work.
it made things easier for companies to import labor, to be honest.
Mm,
And so
okay.
we've avoided a problem. And so is should we see more Canadians work on farms and in processing plants and in food service? I would say so, absolutely. And but that pressure comes from all of us as consumers. We want cheap food. We want cheap food,
Ah.
and companies want to remain competitive. Now, governments have actually allowed companies, farmers, processors to import that work from abroad. And so, what happens if you basically say, enough is enough? Would we see more Canadians, or would we see closures? I think we need to be a little bit careful with that. I mean, certainly that program has allowed for people to come into Canada, appreciate Canada as a country, of course, and make some wealth. But the path to citizenship has never been clear. So if you want to use that as a recruitment tool, or as an immigration tool to get people to
Hmm.
work in Canada and stay
Hmm.
in Canada, sure, but there's no evidence of that right now. It's just about labor and support,
Right.
and supporting a sector that really needs labor.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about the supply management system in this country and how it works, where you buy quotas. I did want to be able to explore that a little bit more. Um, so within that system in supply management, and I want to try to um, make this as understandable as possible. We have different parts of the agricultural system that doesn't participate in the supply management system. Like we've got beef, pork, grain, I mean, a myriad of other parts of the agricultural system. But who participates in the supply management system? Just to summarize that.
Yeah, so you're talking about the SM5. So you got broilers, turkey, chicken, eggs, and dairy. Basically, that's
Okay.
the SM5
So,
right there.
so those producers participate in the supply management system. So if you could just explain the really simple basics, why was that system set up only for that sector? Like if that sector, if supply management is so good in terms of its benefits, why was that not done for, well, everything within agriculture in Canada?
Yeah, the well, supply management was attractive, was an attractive model due to those sectors' intensive production cycle. So, for example, with dairy, cows produce milk every single day. And
Indeed.
so if you don't have a market for your product, it becomes more difficult to keep some production capacity domestically. Same for eggs. Chickens will actually lay one egg a day, and so if you have fifty
Yes.
thousand laying hens, well, you got 50,000 eggs to sell every single day. So,
Hmm.
yeah, as you can imagine, and chicken, the cycle is now 8 weeks. In 8 weeks, you actually have a chicken to harvest, and so
Hmm.
supply management becomes less attractive as the production cycle lengthens. So, whether it's livestock with cattle and hogs is like 3 4 months, cattle is 2 years.
Hmm.
I know that Quebec actually has looked at cranberries. Cranberries, the cycle is much longer. I think really that's the motivation behind adopting supply management for those commodities.
Okay. So help us understand then when you set up a farm, the costs obviously vary from province to province. But when you buy quota, the license to produce in this supply management system, what does it generally cost to, say, buy quota for, say, a dairy cow?
So the quota value for a dairy farm in Canada, on average, is anywhere between 2.5 to $3 million right now. So
Per
it
cow.
varies from one province to another. So some provinces have decided to cap the value of quotas, but some haven't. So in Quebec, for example, for one cow, the quota value is about 24,000, but in Alberta, it's over 50,000 now. So it does
And in
vary
BC,
between
it's even higher.
provinces.
In
That's
BC, I
right.
think it's like 75,000.
That's right.
And don't
BC
quote
is
me on
the
that
highest
figure,
in the
but it's a
country.
lot of money. So when you set up a farm, and I think this is what Canadians probably wouldn't realize, is in these industries of supply management, you can't set up or enter into the farming business because your number one cost right off the bat is the quota, the license.
Well, it's
Is
their
that right?
biggest asset. It's an asset. So and this is what's ironic with supply management, because when supply management in dairy was set up back in 1972 by the godfather of supply management, which is Eugene Wellen, uh, his idea was to actually give quotas to farmers, but the quotas would still belong to the state, the government. So, and my understanding is that Pierre Trudeau, the prime minister at the time, basically just granted that value to. They just gave those quotas for free to farmers without understanding how these rents would gain in value over time. And so this is why we have a problem today, because and this is why this is so political for farmers, because we have $48 billion of quotas out there now. It all belongs to
$48 billion. dollars.
Yep. It belongs to farmers, and so farmers need those quotas to use as collateral to invest, to
Mhm.
trade for their pension and everything else. So that was probably the biggest mistake that we've ever made. That was back in that, and that went against the person who actually thought about the system in the first place.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Eugene Wellen actually never saw the privatization of quota values to
Oh, I
avoid
see.
the
Yes.
exact problem we're facing today against President Trump.
Remarkable. So, in other words, we're in a system now. We're kind of caught within this system because, well, that's a lot of money. $48 billion are
Yeah.
now in private hands. So now we're kind of locked in, and so it's very hard to change that kind of system. Now, on the other hand, couldn't you argue that that system helps protect those smaller family farms? Like if you look at so many other countries, I mean, it seems like if you look internationally, a lot of agriculture is subsidized either directly or indirectly. So
Yeah.
this is the way that Canada's chosen. I'm not aware of any other system like this in the world that we've chosen to subsidize that industry in agriculture. Am I missing the perspective here?
Yeah. I mean, there's the, the quota system. I mean, I'd say if you look around the country, I, I I don't buy the argument that supply management has actually kept our farms smaller. Uh, some producers have actually kept some farms smaller, but the regime itself has allowed for farms to grow. I mean, the largest dairy farm we have is as over 2,000 dairy cows. So there
Actually,
is.
the largest one is not too far from here. It's in
It's in
Chilliwack and
BC.
it has over 6,000.
That's right. So so it's not impossible to have larger dairy farms. Just a lot of producers chose not to compete. Going back to the concept of competition, a lot of farmers
Mm.
just don't
Mhm.
want to compete. They just don't, and they're not interested in it. And I think that's the problem. And
Okay,
if you
so
want,
how many people then are in the supply management system at the producer level? Like it's is it several hundred thousand or is it just a few thousand?
we have about 9,400 farms, dairy farms left in Canada. So, but you see, you have two different dairy sectors in Canada. You have east of Toronto and west of Toronto. Okay.
Mm,
So east of Toronto, it's all about fair price, and farms are smaller, and they don't want to compete. They just want a fair price. And
yes.
so and
Huh.
west of Toronto, it's about volume. It's about competitiveness, and that's the kind of dairy farms you see in Woodstock, Ontario, or Manitoba, or in Chilliwack, for example. Um,
Interesting. So there's almost a divide within the dairy industry
oh,
itself.
absolutely, of course, yeah. There's different ways to see. That's why I think ending the quota system. I'm not sure that's the solution. I think the solution is all about making supply management more competitive and
Ah.
optimize the system overall.
So how would you do those kinds of improvements from a policy perspective? What would you recommend to improve our supply management system?
A couple of steps. I would reform the Canadian Dairy Commission. I would make it more transparent so we know exactly how the pricing formula works. Because right now they come
Ah,
up with prices and we don't know how. We don't know how they set these prices, and that's why in Canada we end up with the most expensive industrial milk prices in the world.
you're
So you
kidding.
want to
So this system is a black box, and you think the principle
the
of what
Canadian
is it
Dairy
again? Oh
Commission
yeah,
is a black
transparency is
box.
a good idea. Yeah, but the commission is a black box, and you'd want to. It sounds like a good idea to me, Sylvan. Is make
That
it
would be my
transparent.
starting point. One. Two, you basically mandate the Canadian Dairy Commission to manage surpluses. Because right now, the entire system is in denial. It doesn't recognize that there are surpluses, but they are surpluses. We believe that we're dumping basically on average 600 million to a billion liters of milk a year. And
Wow,
uh, and
that's
right
huge.
now, the CDC is mandated to manage a strategic reserve for butter. Why not do that for powdered milk? This is something the Americans cannot do because they do not have supply management. So when I talk
Mm,
about optimizing the system, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Okay.
okay.
Third, I would actually buy out farmers who don't want to compete. So as the formula pricing brings down the price, you'll basically squeeze some farmers out of the system. You just buy them out instead of just compensating, writing checks
Hmm.
to farmers because we're signing trade deals. Instead of doing that, you just buy them out. And then you actually focus on those who do want to compete. And lastly, I would actually create a category to export dairy products out to different markets because by 2030, and this is something that we rarely talk about in Canada, by 2030, the world will be short of milk. We're drinking more milk around the world. And the world will be short by 2030, the world will be short
Ah,
5 times our national production as a country. There are opportunities out there, and people want Canadian products. But right now, based on the system we have no chance in taking advantage of any of that.
oh wow. So that sounds like a great opportunity. The vision of improving the supply management system so we can export more food to the world. That sounds
And
like a
over
good
20
plan to me.
years, and the last thing I would do over 20 years, I would reduce tariffs on imports. And so over 20 years, that's the roadmap. You need 20 years to actually get to that point. You can't do it overnight.
Mhm.
Right now, Donald Trump is basically pressing the entire dairy sector to adopt a new model, and we're not ready for it. Why? Because we've never had a debate. We've never actually had a discussion about the
Ah,
future of the dairy sector, like supply management 2.0, which is why people are panicking right now. And it shouldn't have been
okay.
that way.
All right. So we need that kind of healthy debate and discussion about these significant policy decisions. And that goes not just for dairy, that goes for, well, all the other parts of the supply management system, including poultry and like chicken, turkey, eggs, everything.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
it's
right?
well, supply management is holding Canada back from an agri-food perspective. It's not just holding back the SM5, but it's also holding back canola and beef and pork because of our positioning around supply management. So it's really, uh, I mean, it's an important discussion to have.
Okay, it really is. So I want to just, in the home stretch of this conversation, reflect on the larger strategic picture with the United States, where certainly in conversations with members of the Trump administration, it's very clear to me that they want to do a major reset, and it's complicated. They have a financial deficit themselves that they've got to get under control. They want to repatriate manufacturing back to the United States, both from an economic but also a security perspective, witness the steel industry and shipbuilding and all the rest. But they really don't want Canada or any other ally to be a protectorate. They want them to be a real ally. And certainly in Canada's case, we know that we don't fulfill our NATO contracts. And there's even concerns about other security issues. And regardless of what we think about that, Donald Trump has definitely zeroed in on what they believe are unfair um, trading practices with the supply management sector. So I want to share this clip here.
Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad, and then it gets up to 275, 300%. So when they're figuring what's Canada charging, they say, oh, about 2%, 3%. But take a look at what happens down the road. When you look a little bit, it's not a pretty picture, and we don't like it, and it's not fair. It's not fair to our farmers. It's not fair to our country. And with countries like Canada, we subsidize a lot of countries and keep them going and keep them in business. In the case of Mexico, it's $300 billion a year. In the case of Canada, it's close to $200 billion a year. And I say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, at what point do we say you got to work for yourselves, and this is why we have the big deficits. This is why we have that amount of debt that's been placed on our heads over the last number of years, and we're really not taking it anymore.
So is that really a fair comment that we're ripping off the United States? Like, why is it that we put a, 200, 300% tariff on imports of dairy products from the United States?
I don't think so. I think economically it's a false debate. When you think about it, I mean, do we want to trade more with the U.S. when it comes to dairy? I don't think they want our products. They have too much of it. Like, they have too much milk. They have too
Hmm.
too much dairy products. And are Canadians willing to drink American milk and eat uh, American dairy product? I don't think so. So economically, it makes little sense to open up the market. So this argument that we're ripping dairy farmers, we're ripping, we're actually cheating and things like that. I don't know if it's a fair argument, but it is a wedge issue. And
Mm.
President Trump knows that, and he will weaponize it to get what he really wants. And that's why
Ah.
supply management has been on the table a lot, because he knows, unlike Trump 1.0, he knows that it's a point of contention domestically, and he's dealing with a very strong lobby, and he's ruffling feathers, and he's going to
Hmm.
continue to do that because he knows that we're absolutely not ready to confront or to deal with ourselves when it comes to supply management 2.0. We're not ready at all. For many years, the debate has been very polarized. You're either against it or for it, and please don't touch it. Or you have the Maxime Berniers of the world saying we need to abolish the system altogether. We've never had a healthy debate around, okay, so
Interesting.
how do we deal with this in an open market? And that's why a lot of people are panicking, hearing Donald Trump criticizing supply
Hmm.
management.
Okay, so I think that's a brilliant insight that it behooves us to think carefully about the existing system, look at how, as you say, improve it so that we can gear up for exports. But in the meantime, we've got a lot of work to do in this country in
Well,
terms
we
of, well,
ratified CUSMA back in 2020, allowing Americans to sell American products American dairy products into Canada, up to 3%, about 3% of our national production. Now, let me
Hmm.
ask you a question, David. Have you seen more American dairy products into your grocery store in recent years?
Very little, very little.
So, why is
Yeah.
that? Well, grocers, so import quotas were granted to certain companies that had no interest in importing more American products because they wanted to sell their own, like Saputo,
Hmm.
Loblaw, and,
Hmm.
and companies like that. So there's little interest, and grocers know that if they carry American dairy product, especially right now, they won't sell. And so there's little interest in selling more dairy into Canada.
Interesting. But I do see some degree of products from the UK,
Yeah, Europe is
other
different.
parts of Europe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Europe is very different. I think everyone has seen more products from the UK for sure, from Europe in general,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
not the US. No.
Okay. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Um, so this is a time of uncertainty, and I think that you have very much opened up our thoughts to what are the issues. Um, and yeah, I think you've given some very good policy advice in terms of a roadmap. Um, do you have a kind of a sense of how is this play going to unfold here? Because I've seen that, I mean, this is a tough negotiation now, the reset in terms of our trading relationship with the United States. And it seems like there's a lot of rhetoric around elbows up during the election. And now it seems a bit more like elbows down as we gave up on the digital services tax, which I think was a bad tax from the very beginning. How is this going to unfold? What's your sense of where this government's going to go when it comes to dealing with threading the needle on how to move forward with supply management and larger trade talks? Because frankly, if they don't bring this together, we kind of jeopardize our larger trade talks that will have a profound impact on the larger Canadian economy. Is that a fair comment, Sylvan?
I think, I mean, you used the word negotiating earlier. I don't think we're negotiating at all. I think we're coping.
We're coping.
And we're coping. Prime Minister Carney is coping with Washington. I mean, nobody can negotiate with Donald Trump. I don't believe it. I
Hmm.
just don't. And for the next few years, we need to accept the fact that you cannot deal with President Trump. You have to cope with him, and that's
Ah.
exactly what President Sheinbaum in Mexico has realized herself. You can
Hmm.
sense a very different tone out of Mexico compared to Canada. Canada has taken this 51 state argument very personally. And we're
Hmm.
still taking this situation very personally. And we need to move beyond that. And Prime Minister Carney needs to move beyond that. The elbows up movement is all about taking these attacks very personally.
Hmm.
This is just it's just business. And yes, our number one trading partner now has a new approach to global trades.
Hmm.
We have a president that doesn't believe in multilateralism, doesn't believe in trades at all. Look at the man himself. He's made his money uh, based on very domestic sectors like real estate and media. He never actually made his money with global trade. He doesn't believe it. He's
Hmm.
never believed in global trades. So we have to
Hmm.
accept that at least for a while. So
Interesting.
if I were Prime Minister Carney, and he's not a globalist either, not at all. I mean, clearly, while Prime Minister Carney is a globalist, and we elected
Mm.
him as the Prime Minister, I have concerns about globalism personally myself, but
Hmm.
if you are to believe in global institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, things like that, you want to focus on that, diversify as much as possible. Is fascination around Europe is concerning because I mean I think Asia should be a priority. Don't be judgmental about trading partners like with China, for example, and India. We need to do business with them as much
Hmm.
as possible. So I would cope with Donald Trump, not provoke. Counter tariffs are a bad idea. A bad
Hmm.
idea. I would basically focus. I would focus on supporting our sectors as we go through the Trump storm, and actually try to establish renewed relationship with other parts of the world. And I would actually put certainly the Asian Pacific market on top with the addition of India and China there.
Okay. So we've got a lot of work to do in this country. So I think you're challenging us, Sylvain, to do the basics well, to be a place where business
But
wants to do business
but
in
I
this
think
country.
to get companies on board, to get Canadians on board, I think Ottawa needs to start being honest with Canadians instead of saying that we're going to be fighting, we're going to be standing tall, we're going to be standing,
Hmm.
we stand our ground against Trump. You just can't do that. It didn't matter who won the election. It would have been the same with the Conservatives.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's important to be honest with Canadians, saying this is how
Yeah.
it's going to be for a while. We're not in control
Hmm.
of the presidency of the United States. We're not in control of
Right.
Congress, and things may change next year with midterms. It may
Hmm.
change, but
Hmm.
for the time being, I think we need to focus on ourselves.
Right on. So within that context, I look at a myriad of policy decisions that we're looking at. For example, um, I mean, we've had the last 10 years a war by the federal government on our largest industry, which is the oil and gas industry in this country, which has had huge ramifications. We don't even get full world prices for our oil and gas. Frontier did a report about showing
Yeah.
the the price differential calculator. We're basically losing 30 to 40 billion dollars easily every year because we can't build pipelines to get our product to the rest of the world. I mean, it's just insane. So, where do you think we should go here in terms of really getting our economy moving again, Sylvan? I mean, I'm looking at the income differential between the average family in Ontario is about 40% less than the poorest state in the United States,
Yeah.
which is Mississippi. I mean, this is pathetic. So, how do you move this country forward,
We're
Sylvan?
not creating wealth in this country, and that's the other thing. Again, we need to be honest with ourselves. Our country is getting poorer, and people are spending less money at the grocery store than last year. So this is the
They are.
reality that we need to face as Canadians. It's not all Trump's fault. You know, some
No,
of it has been
well,
self-inflicted.
I think all of this has been largely self inflicted, Sylvan. I mean, we don't even have free trade within this own country.
So that's why I think it's important to really, look at ourselves in the mirror. At least we have a new government with a new mandate. Let's
Hmm.
start fresh and stop playing games. I
Right
think the
on.
elbows up campaign was childish, ridiculous, embarrassing even. We need
Hmm.
to move on from there and focus on business, economics, and be serious about our future and not just say, well, we disagree with this one person out of Washington and we're going to fight him.
Right
You
on.
just
Yeah,
can't. Yeah.
it's absurd. So I'm just curious. Could we learn from other countries internationally? I think of New Zealand in 1984 when they were hitting the wall with their version of socialism way back when. They went through a major reform, and that was under a Labor government. They said that that system wasn't working. I think a big part of it was their agricultural reforms.
Yep.
And is that a good example that we could learn from as a country?
Well, what we've learned from New Zealand is that a crisis, well, they didn't waste a crisis because it was a crisis. I mean, they had to change.
Yes.
Um, I think right now we are facing a crisis as a nation, but I don't think our own government sees it as a crisis. Well, case on point. Prime Minister Carney decided to let Parliament go for the summer in the
Wow.
middle of what I would argue is one of the most significant trade crises that we're facing as a nation in
Hmm.
recent history. So So I don't think Ottawa is seeing this as a crisis, but when you talk to businesses, and I've actually spoken to businesses, they see this as a crisis. Why? Because there there's a lot of uncertainty. Every single day when you get up in the morning running your business, you have no idea what was what was posted on True Social the night before, for example, and how will that impact your business? Um, we shouldn't be wasting a crisis, and we are wasting a crisis right now because we're
I think
not
you're
being
right.
honest with ourselves.
I think you're right. So your impression is that Ottawa is still in a bubble. They don't understand
That's the one
this
difference
even
between
as
the
a crisis.
conservatives and liberals. If the conservatives would have won, we still would have a parliament working. And by the way, Mr. Carney has a minority government, so he needs parliament to get through this. And frankly, I just don't see the evidence of seeing a leader considering this as a crisis. And
Well,
unfortunately, until we get there, I don't have a whole lot of my expectations will remain low.
I think that's a great insight, Sylvan, is that this could be understood, and I think you're right. It's the definition of a crisis. It's out of the bounds of normalcy, um, as we don't even have a operating budget in this country federally.
Yep.
And I think that these types of policy discussions, including in the food industry, and you've alluded to this, have a significant imperative when it comes to driving senses of Western alienation. I mean, this is where you've got I think a huge impact on that national discussion. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. And so I'm hoping that we'll come out of this summer with a better sense of our geopolitical positioning and how we could actually take advantage of this situation to strengthen our economy and not allow this one person out of the U.S. to weaken our economy even further. And that's exactly what's going on right now.
Well, Sylvan, I want to thank you so much for this far reaching conversation today. It's very clear that you've helped us understand the complexity and the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities within our food and agricultural system, and indeed how this is all interrelated and how everything's on the table. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, David. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.